Hey guys, hopefully you can hear me this time around. It looks like I got my microphone and everything set up correctly, so looks like we're good. Let me know in the chat if you have any issues. I think I got the screen resized correctly too. I haven't streamed on this computer yet. So yeah, what we're going to be doing today is building notifications in Rails. I already got a gem started for it, so we are more or less working on improving that and adding a couple features and getting it to actually work in a real application. So right now, it's just a gem. And being just a gem, we need to, we need to actually use it. So we can write tests and things, but to actually use it and see how it works and how we can customize it in a real app is a whole different story. So it's not just an academic thing anymore. So we're gonna have a real setup here, which is cool. So our notifications gem is called Noticed. It right now supports database, email, WebSocket with Action Cable, Twilio, Vonage, Nexmo, SMS, and we'll be able to add more notification services in there. So right now, the way you'll define a notification, define a class called notification, whatever, and then inherit from noticed base. And then you can deliver by database and deliver by Action Cable or, Twilio. And then you can send a notification with, what's up guys? You can send a notification by calling the notification class .with. Pass in whatever metadata you need, and I recommend not passing in an actual active record model. So it's easier or better, more reliable to pass in like a global ID or something that you can look up later. And then you can call notification deliver later, which will queue it up as background jobs. So each one of these delivery methods will be a background job that is run. And the only exception is the database one. So we really want to write that database record for the notification first so that the other delivery methods can use that information if they want. For example, on a comment notification, you might want to insert it into your nav bar here. And you want to be able to mark this notification as read whenever they open the notifications nav bar section. And so you need that database record ID when you pass it over to Action Cable. So that's what we're working on. So far, we've got quite a few of these functional, but I want to build some extra features like an if and an unless option so we can choose whether or not to trigger the notification. So that's one thing we are probably going to dive into today. So concept for this is pretty straightforward. We have our base class here that you inherit from, and this is let's see, I don't think we need that anymore because the delivery methods should use that. But that's basically defining that these delivery methods should run as active job classes. Let's see. So we want to go through and in notice base kind of add in this delivery. What am I looking at? This looks a lot different than what I remember yesterday. So last night I was working on this and had refactored a bunch of these things, and maybe I got rid of some of those changes because, and I probably did because it's gotten a little tricky in a few things, as you might expect, because of the serialization that happens with active job. When you pass in these params, then that is a little bit, we should rename this variable here, params, is a little bit tricky because active job's going to convert them. So if you passed in like user is user number 1, it's going to convert that or serialize it and won't necessarily pull it out the same way. So can be kind of a pain. Yes, so let's go into our test folder. I've been writing some tests in here, and let me pull up the terminal here for you guys off my other monitor. So to do this, we want to just check if the options for the delivery method define an if or an unless, and we want to call those kind of accordingly. So for our base class, when we're calling the deliver method, we can probably go through when we perform one of the delivery methods. We can just return if. Well, let's pull this out first. So we're grabbing the class and everything here, but we want to grab the if value from our options. So right now we have method options in order to grab, say, foo is bar in this example that I have here. So we could grab options foo, and that would give us back bar. So we want to check if options if, and we want, if that exists, we want to send that method to our notification. And we're already in the notification, so we can just call send on that. So we want to check if options if. Get the method name from that. So if there is one, we can call send method name, and basically we want to return unless the if, and if there is an unless. So the if clause should return false if you don't want to run it, which is why we can do an unless here. So by doing two nots, two rights don't make, or two wrongs don't make a right. Basically, we are going to terminate if that returns false. So we could also do if not send here if you want. That might be a little bit easier to wrap your head around. So return if the if statement is falsy. And then if the unless is defined, then we can return if it's truthy. So hopefully that makes sense. It's a little confusing to explain, but we can go and write an example here and say test cancels delivery if when if clause is falsy. Okay, so let's define a little class inside of here. We will say if, we'll say, what should we call this method? We'll say falsy, maybe? Falsy, turn false. You can maybe call this if example. And then we can say, one of these examples up here, we have a count of the delivery methods. Yeah, well, we can say if example dot new dot deliver to the user, and we should see that there is no delivered results. So assert empty, and let's run Rails test, notice test 169, nice. And that all worked correctly, we should get a passing test. But let's return true and make sure that our test is correct or accurate. Because if this also passes, then that would be bad, and our test would clearly not be doing what we want. So there we go. So that's working like we want. You guys might not do this very often, but you can actually define a class inside of a test. It's only available inside of that test, which is pretty cool. So this is a really slick way of, encompassing that all in the test together. You don't have to define it somewhere shared, and it's pretty handy. So it cancels delivery when unless clause is truthy. So for reference, I've got a test delivery method that simply records the notification that was sent to a class attribute. So it's just keeping track of all of these that were ever sent, and that's all it does. It doesn't deliver anything really. It delivers it to an array in memory. But it's really, really handy for tests so that they can go and record if it was sent or not. So we can really make use of that right here. And I encourage you guys to write little classes and test helpers like that if you are building something complicated like this, because you can use that to really ensure that the wrapper code around that stuff is working like you want it to. So here, if we have unless, we'll do a truthy version. Truthy. Let's have it return false. Our test should fail. This is line 82. So it fails, and if we fix it to work how we want it, we can now see that it passes. Voila. So now by doing these 2 lines of code here, this is going to make it so that we will cancel execution of that automatically, which is nifty. Now, I put these here in this perform method, and the way that I've got it running is that the noticed, so your notification class is an active job class, and then when you call deliver later, it will actually queue up and run itself, but it will specify the delivery method for each. So it will call perform later, give it the recipient, the delivery method, the database record, and the params. And if you do it immediately, it will run those in line. That works pretty well, but this is probably more of the place that we should be defining this logic. So maybe let's do that down there. So we can have this. If we were to pull that out, then we don't even have to queue up those jobs at all. That's going to be better on our backend processor, because that's going to not even kick off a sidekick job for each one of those if it's not going to do anything anyways. So we shouldn't even queue them up. In this case, we're doing it on an each block. And if you aren't familiar, you can, in Ruby, do Ruby next each. So if you have a each block, you can call next if you would like to skip that iteration. So rather than doing a return from the method, this is a block. You don't want to return from the entire method, which would cancel everything. You just want to skip this individual item. So we'll say next if and go on that way. Okie dokie. The only other thing I can think of here is that we could potentially just do a method dig options if here if we wanted instead. get rid of that local assignment. It's not that much cleaner, and it makes this a little bit longer, but we can drop that little variable there, and this should do the the exact same thing, be good enough. I think that's what I'll do. Pretty straightforward. I don't want to, one should be unless, of course. I do not want to try and combine these into a single conditional because they're two separate things, and if they ever needed to change, I would want to keep these the same. So we're going to leave that where it's kind of duplicated on purpose, but we're looking for two different options, clauses in there, and so on. And yeah, I think that is pretty solid. So maybe we'll dive into actually building out a notification inside of Jumpstart Pro. So that'll give you guys a little sneak peek on that. I've been working on this notifications menu. We've already got a notification for when you invite a user and they accept their invitation. And clicking on this will link you to the invitation or the accounts page, and you'll be able to see that user in there. I don't actually have a user in this account right now. Actually, that was a personal account, so I couldn't anyways. So for example, if we wanted to invite Bob as a member of our team, we can copy this link, and we want to be able to, in a incognito browser, let Bob sign up and join our team. So Bob right now can sign up and he'll be added to the team, but we're going to want to create a notification for that. So I've defined this accepted invite notification. I'm going to comment out the mailer stuff for now. The email stuff is going to require you to define your own mailer and method for the mailer, and that's going to be what we'll call from the delivery method. So in this example, we're customizing the two database and the two WebSocket things, because basically when you're writing to the database, it's going to pass in some attributes to the model and create the database record, and we want all of those attributes in the database to match what you need. And if you're building a multi-tenant app, you need a way to override this to include the account ID inside of your notification. So what we've got here is you pass in your account ID in the params. We'll remove it from the params and write it to your database instead. And so that's kind of handy to be able to do that. Now, for the WebSocket version, we could send over the same params that you passed in, which would be fine, but we've decided that it would be better in the Jumpstart app to actually send over the HTML, which we can insert into our navbar. So this is what we've got. So this is rendering the partial for the notification, which will need some metadata, but it has some extra methods here, like the translated message for the notification that says so-and-so accepted your invitation. And then the URL we want to link them to, and the user. So we can basically now send this out anytime that a user accepts an invitation. So the controller for that is that one, but we want the model for it. So account invitation on our accept method. Basically want to create that accepted invite with and pass in our data. Hey guys, how's it going? So this accepted invite, we're going to have the account ID, which we're going to need to pass in as a param. So we'll have our account.id, and we'll have our user. We can also pass in things like the account user object, which is like the join table. Oh, cool! You're from Chicago. Awesome. We were just talking about taking the train up from St. Louis to Chicago recently. We did that a few months ago. It feels like a year ago now, but like taking the train up and wandering around the city, it's pretty great. So for this user thing, we can, if we want, we don't even really need, I guess we need the user ID. So we'll say user.id here and deliver later. And really we want to loop through either, we want to notify like the account owner. So whoever has access to invite a user is really what we want. Or the account invitation, we could notify the user who invited them. There's a few different options. So we want to figure out which users we want to notify, and we can call them here. So yeah, let's see. We want probably I'm trying to think this out. We want definitely the account owner to know about the invitation. We probably don't really need to notify the owner, or we probably want to at least notify the owner and whoever invited it if they're different people. So maybe what we do is we say account owner and account user, or no, we're in the invitation, so we could do invited by unique, just do recipient or user, something like that. And the only thing I have to think about is if we're destroying the account invitation at that point, we don't want to lose the invited by association. So we'll have to be careful about that. So we'll want to accept the invitation and make sure that notification is created correctly. I don't watch a whole lot of sports, but it was pretty exciting to see the Blues. And everybody's excitement about them this past year is pretty crazy. Love that. I think baseball is probably the biggest sport here in St. Louis, but the Blues really kicked it up a notch lately. Let's see. So I need to pull up the code base for Jumpstart Pro. And we want to go into our tests for integration tests, for invitations. And we want to, I guess we can do this on maybe more of a model test, and that might be a little bit better. So we can test our accept. Yeah, this will be good. We can do an assert difference notification count. And we can run this test and make sure that it not only does it create an account user, but it also creates a notification object. That would be a good test here. So we can say test models. Go in the right directory. Rails test models, count invitation test, and we're looking at line 39. Okie dokie. So notifications has no column named data. I changed that recently. So if we go to our notification and look for the word data, that is my bad. So the notification object here probably references data somewhere. Or it does not anymore. Where is this? Table, fixture, aha. So for the notification.rb or notification YAML, we've got a data here and we want params because I renamed that column so our fixtures don't blow up. Man, Benjamin, that's pretty insane. I didn't realize. It's so crazy how, like, such a small world it is, but it's also weird to me, like, we don't have a whole lot of tech, it feels like, in St. Louis, but Jack Dorsey came from here, Jim McKelvey, Square, Twitter, you know, like, there's a lot of people that have some connection to St. Louis who, you know, used to live here a long time ago. It's fascinating. It, like, always blows my mind because I don't feel like it's a tech place, really, but sure is. So that's really awesome to hear. I love it. And thanks for being part of the community. Okay, so not null violation. No value in column account ID violates not null constraint. So our account ID here is probably what's failing. So, or no, it is not. It is our fixtures yet again. Hey, Leonardo, welcome. Ecuador's pretty exciting. I've always wanted to make it down there, but traveling right now is not a good thing, so I might have to wait. Let's pull up our notifications and fix that. So this is one of the unique things about Jumpstart Pro is that our database is going to be set up a little bit differently because it's a multi-tenant application. So we'll have account, just give it the first account, assume that this one for the second account is good enough. And I believe we have, yeah, 2 accounts there, so maybe we'll have our, there we go. So we've got our test passing. Wonderful. Oops, I just clicked the insert add button and I didn't even know it was a thing. That's cool. So sorry for the ad. Didn't know what that did. Okie dokie. So we may also want to here say notification equals notification dot last. Take a look at that notification and see if it wrote all the data to it correctly. Okay, so we have our account ID, we have our user ID, and yeah, I think that looks good. There's honestly, you know, not a whole lot to this for testing it. Simply checking to make sure that the notification count was incremented is really all I want here. We don't need to verify too much of that. Or do we? So if the invited by user was different, we might want to check that. Yeah, because then it should count, or this count should be increased by 2 for that invitation. So if in this example, which one are we using? Account invitations 1. So if we were to have this by a different user in the company account, so let's say, yeah, user 2. This test should fail because, yeah, it should increase by 2 instead of just 1. So that might not be a bad test there to verify that it increased by 2. We might actually want to write just another test for that. But we might need to, write like a different fixture or something in that case, or like generate a new account invitation. It's really not too big of a deal to have it like super thoroughly tested. Yeah, so we're building notifications that like any kind of notification basically. So right now I'm focused on navbar notifications, which are like a mixture of writing the notification to your database, but also broadcasting it over a WebSocket and adding it to the page. So when you open this, it can mark it as read. But we might also want email notifications of a user accepting an invite. We might want a text message. There's all kinds of different things. And so building a system that you can say, this notification could be delivered 8 different ways. Let's check with the user to see which ones they would like to receive. This gives you the ability to do that. So I want to build that out in your profile and settings, like a notification section in here. So you can define your notification types, and users can define their preferences for those, and then you can build into your app, here is a notification, it gets fired and is sent to these people, and then we'll go check with those people and see if they actually want to receive that through the various different methods. So that is what we are working on. It's quite a complicated little problem. So that's one of the reasons why it's taken me so long. Typically, the easiest thing is you send out email notifications. That's fine, but like no real application, no production thing really just uses email notifications. Every Facebook and Twitter and other, professional app is using some sort of more complicated notification system. So we're trying to build that. So like, it is, yeah, it's a lot. Okay, so let's add a third, let's not modify our initial fixture. Let's add a new test for this. And let's not worry about that. Let's leave our initial test alone. And we can back out all these. Whoa, too far. Okay. So, accept sends notifications. We can assert difference in this one. And this should look for notification.count. We accept the user. Honestly, that should be good enough for the base case. So let's run the whole file actually. Oh, we're broken something. Account invitations on token. Okay, so our token here is, change that to say 8. I just hard-coded tokens. We probably should make that like a secure random for these. One of the things that is nice is let's look up the has secure token in Rails. One of the nice things about writing fixtures is that you can still do them dynamically, and so you can add ERB directly in here. Yeah, so this is using secure random base 58. Okie dokie. So you can call generate unique secure token. Easy enough. Instance public methods. Self So that's a class method though that it's calling here, is it not? Self class, generate unique secure token. When in doubt, go directly to GitHub. Maybe it's both. I don't know. There's no... Oh, it's under module class methods. Yeah, okay. So it is a class method. You'd be surprised how much I go directly to the Rails source code to see how things work, to figure out how I want to implement my own code. That was a big inspiration for this whole thing. Working on, so a lot of the inspiration for this, just for some context, is Laravel has notifications built into their core framework, which is sweet. I think Rails is possibly going to get that extracted out. I know they've talked about extracting out notifications from Basecamp. They're like called deliveries. And I was trying to port over basically the Laravel notifications to Rails. So they work very similar. You generate a notification, give it a name, and then you have modules you include, and you can convert the params to email or to database and so on. So you can say user notify them of this invoice or whatever. We'll probably implement something like that, but I'm not super worried about it. I kind of like the create your notification and then tell it who to send to. They have quite a few of those kind of things too. So this is an example of like they have these methods you can implement like via, and so this is going to determine we want to send it with either Nextmail SMS or email and database. And yeah, you can define your queues. It's, you know, it's an interesting thing. It like is definitely more PHP like, and I think we've got more opportunity to make it more Railsy by using Ruby. Like there's so much cool stuff we can do in Ruby that isn't really possible in PHP. So you can make it more intuitive. And that's what I'm going for here. Let's go back now, run our tests, see if we can get these running. I have an issue with user here because of where's user defined. Let's do a git diff real quick on test models, account invitation test, see what I missed. Hey, that's awesome. I just did that video on Vonage, their webcam or, you know, streaming video stuff, and that was pretty sweet. I was impressed with that. That was surprisingly easy to get set up. Okay, let's do this. Let's grab that user like we did in the other test. Let's put it down here. And okie dokie, we need to change the name for that. Sends notifications to account owner and inviter. And this one should give you two notifications. Okie dokie. So this one is going to be account invitation. We want account invitations third. It's not a descriptive name of this account invitation, so I really want to well, maybe we don't even need this. Yeah, we don't need this extra fixture. Just looking at this is the same thing invited by 2. So if we use that second invitation to That should do the trick. Bam, all of our tests pass. So, was not the most straightforward thing. Basically, we needed a invitation sent by someone who wasn't the account owner. This fixture we already had. I didn't think this one was set up right. Didn't really read it. So this one actually was set up correctly. The owner of the account is not the same person who invited this user, invited to at example.com. So because those are different, that would send out 2 notifications, and that's what we wanted to verify. Just make sure that, it's going to send it to the right users. If we did that on the first one, we are inviting by the company's owner, user number 1, or named number 1. And so that is going to send it to one person. It's not going to send it to him twice. So that is not a fixture we can use for that example. But we can use it for this one. Now, I think it's better for us to write these tests separately for the notifications. We could try to blend them in to this original test here that we had for accepting an invitation, but it starts to get too complicated. We're testing multiple things. An acceptance of an invitation should be able to happen whether or not you have notifications for it. So I want that test to work independently of notifications and not verify any of that. And then having these at the bottom, I think, is good. So we probably don't need this test here necessarily. It's kind of redundant. And we would probably be fine with just a single one. So I'll have to decide whether or not I want to keep that. It doesn't really matter. This is a template at the end of the day. I want to show you that stuff, but I don't want this to be overbearing because you're going to change your application. You're going to change the way stuff works. You might want to send these notifications out to everybody on the team. So I don't want this necessarily to be too overbearing with the tests. So that's, I think, where we're going to leave that. And really, I think that leaves our notifications in a pretty good spot. So for reference, notification partial here is just going to render out the message for the notification and have a link to a URL. So I'm going to assume that every notification in Jumpstart Pro will have a URL you want to link them to and then a message, and that should be good. So I think there's some things that we might want to improve upon in the notifications classes. Right now, there's no definition here of the attributes that are required to create a notification. So, for example, this one needs an account ID and a user ID. And I'm thinking we might want to define maybe maybe we want to inherit from active model. And we could validate the these attributes, the params that you pass in, because then we could even cast them to the right format potentially. But more importantly, I just want to make sure that these are documented somewhere, and that when you're creating a notification, you pass in the right data. Because if you don't, and you try and render out the notification, it's just going to blow up, and that gets to be confusing because a lot of stuff has happened. For example, you've sent the notification, it wrote it to the database, then you're rendering it from the database record. There's a lot that happened, and you have to track back quite a ways to figure that out. So kind of confusing. Yeah, I think notification previews would be really interesting. That would be a cool feature that you could probably add pretty easily to the Rails conductor stuff, and just define like a route in development. And if you want to contribute that kind of stuff, if you dive into the Rails source code, it's pretty simple to add that. So, for example, Action Mailer has those routes. If you go into lib, where is it? I'm trying to think. There's somewhere in here that you define the, yeah, here it is. So if show previews, this will prepend routes inside of the Rails, or in the rail tie, which is kind of interesting. Like, it's not actually a config routes thing like engines have, but it's marked as internal as true. So I believe that is only available like in development. And then you have access to these routes, send them to those controllers. Then Action Mailer somewhere in there is defined the controllers for those. So Rails mailers. So I wonder if that's in the rail ties library. There's a lot of stuff that's in rail ties, and I don't quite ever remember where things go. Yeah. So Rails mailers controller. There we go. Rail ties lib Rails mailers controller. So this is what implements that controller for the Rails conductor and mailer previews. So you could use the same approach, add it to the gem, so it only runs in development and that sort of thing. And, you know, you could do something similar to that. Probably gets a little tricky, you know, rendering the previews, like what, because the format of the previews, so the format of a notification is different all the time. So you have a notification in your browser, which is going to need a URL. It's going to need a message, timestamp probably. But if you send it over as a text message, like, that's a whole different format. Generally, you're probably going to want a message and a URL and a timestamp for most of those. But an email might want to introduce some extra buttons. For example, when you are sent the invitation, you could maybe do a notification to the, and that's one feature Laravel has, sending a notification to someone who isn't a user of your app. We don't really have that, but you could create like a struct or something instead of like a user or an active record model and pass that in as your recipient, and that would work. It's not as intuitive, but it could work. So, question about my Vim configs. I used to use Carl Huda Janus for Vim, like all the time. It was a really easy way to convert over from Sublime and stuff. I really wanted to get into Vim. Used Janus for a long time, and now I don't even know if I have these pushed up. So my dot files are all available. Yeah, it doesn't look like it. Yeah, I did this more recently. So I got a new laptop and then changed things. So my Vim RC, I'll try and push up. I'm using Vundle and several things. I still got to tweak it quite a bit because I'm missing some of the features I liked of Janus, like comments and so on. So I got to re-add those, but using this handful of plugins and config things. So I'll push those up because I don't want to lose this config anyways, and it'll be more of a work in progress so I can get there. So yeah, going back to the previews, like I wonder if we should just, I don't know, because you almost need to convert I don't know. It's hard. It's a hard one because, excuse me. If you were rendering a database notification, it's just a database record, and then the WebSocket stuff is like JSON you send over the WebSocket, And it's like depends on how your client side wants to handle that, whether or not you want to display it as HTML or not. So that's the weird thing about notifications. They can't be too strict about formatting or consistent. They need to be customizable. So yeah, it's strange. Let's get back to the parameters for this. I really would like to be able to define params. I wonder. We could definitely inherit from active record or active model and add the attribute API. That would work. Trying to think what would be a better option, if anything. Strong params is interesting. You could maybe repurpose that a bit. But it doesn't really do much for you. It's more for sanitizing, from the client. So I don't think strong params is a great option there. We could build our own. We could definitely do that. It would be a pretty simple thing, but at that point, we might as well just use active model or something. So maybe let's explore that a little bit. So let's close this and go back to noticed and take a look at building out some methods like that. So we have this class method for deliver by, and it adds all these to a class or attribute called delivery methods. It keeps track of all of those. Effectively, it would be doing the same thing where it would be defining parameters on the class level, and then when we call deliver later, we just validate that all of those are filled out and not nil, which wouldn't be bad. So yeah, we'll have to think on this real quick. Let me check my email real quick. We're trying to sell our house, and I'm going to work on some videos too about building a house, because it's quite the ordeal, and it's very similar to building software. There's so many decisions and architecture things to figure out and how you want to structure stuff. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. So yeah, sounds like hopefully got some people interested in buying it finally. So that's going to be exciting if we can get that done. Okie dokie. So right now we're inheriting from application job from your Rails app as the parent, because this is an active record class. And last night I refactored this so that instead of the notification itself as a job, or as the job, I made each of the delivery methods a job. And I think that refactor helped this code quite a bit, get a little bit cleaner, because we really want each one of those delivery methods to be delivered separately as a background job, so that imagine your notification gets sent out and you write it to the database, you send it over WebSockets, SMS fails, and then email never gets sent because the SMS crashed. I wanted to be able to send out, all of those as separate jobs. So if it failed, you could retry it safely, and so on. But that introduces a lot of complexity from the serialization standpoint. So you need to be able to pass all those objects around, and hopefully they stay the same, but because you're passing them through active job, they're getting serialized. And I need to go back and kind of work through that some more in the future. Because there was something I was doing where I created a notification, passed in a user, and it got converted to the JSON version of the user because the model converted it when it saved it to the database. And then when you rehydrate that to render the notification, it was just hash and not a active record model, which is not what you want. So that is a little bit tricky when it comes to building notifications and mapping them to your database because of that rehydration. So one of the things that this does is in Jumpstart, I have some code that when we look for all the notifications to display from the database, like the last 10 notifications, we load those and then we convert them to instances of the class, of the notification class, and then assign the database record as an attribute on that. So they have all of the logic from the notification, and that's nice, but it does make it a little bit trickier. So yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of different, maybe some good solutions for that I'm not thinking of. But when you've got, like, global IDs are not bad, and they help. But when it's kind of arbitrary, basically global IDs are the only real good solution for that, because you got to pass in and save this arbitrary data into the params JSON column in your database. So you can't save a real user record association in there. So global IDs are really the only thing that works. That gives you the freedom to associate any models you want, but you have to go and pass the global ID in explicitly. You can't just pass that in directly. Otherwise, it's going to work a little weird. So that's why in the README we have that example. I was just trying to figure out last night if there's a better way of solving that. Like, can we autocast that to a global ID if it's inside of a hash? It's maybe possible, but we may have to actually pull out. Ooh, that might be the solution. We might be able to hijack the Rails active job serializers and use that as the serializer when we write to the JSON column. That's interesting. If any of you guys have looked at active delivery, an abstract notification or whatever it's called, that Paulkin wrote, Noticed is very, very similar to all this behind the scenes. We have a little bit like real example delivery methods, and I think the only one they really have is mailers. But it works pretty well the way they've got this set up. I was having trouble wrapping my head around the documentation and how all this worked when I was reading it originally. So when I created my own, it's got, almost the same syntax. I didn't realize it, but it's almost the same as what Laravel has. So maybe Laravel was copying Rails or the Basecamp video. But it's very similar. And the thing that I want to look into is, are they, and this maybe needs to be in the abstract, what is it? Abstract notifier, that's it. If we can hijack that or use the active job backend, async adapters, active job. There we go. Notify now and queue, perform later. Yeah, they're not doing anything specific with it. If we can reuse the active job serializer stuff, this arguments, this might be perfect. Because what this does is, like, if you give it a hash, it will go and believe recursively go through the hash, to make sure that it serializes all of the keys and values and everything for that. Yeah, that could be the perfect solution. We maybe need to tackle that next. I almost want to work on that first, but I feel like we should try inheriting from active model for the attributes. So let's try that. So active model is the main one we want to look at. This allows you to define, well, not that one. Active model, well, we're going to want the validations. Active model attributes is the one I was thinking of. Active model attributes gives us the attributes API. So this lets you say attribute, whatever, and a type, which is really sweet. So the type is going to allow you to cast those attributes to a certain type, which is sweet. So maybe we don't need that, but I like the idea of trying to use it. So we have account ID here as integer. For this, we can do attributes. I don't know. User ID is integer is fine. Ideally, long term, it'd be sweet to be able to say user or something, and just make sure that that is passed in, and then the serializer could probably take care of it. So maybe that's something we can try as well. Let's look up the Rails active record JSON serializer. Active model serializers as JSON from JSON. Okie dokie. So this is serialize and deserialize. So if that's all you have to implement, serializable hash, let's take a look at this. They don't implement that. Okay. Yeah, because the other thing is this is going to generally be called for the arguments of serializers. Serialize, where is that? Where is this referencing the serializers class, I wonder? I'm trying to figure out where this code is. Could be confusing. I forget there's a serializers file. This is where all the serializer options are defined. If we can include, actually we've got active job serializers already, or should, because we are using active job as our parent class here. Active job base no longer dependence on serializers. Interesting. Yeah, I don't know if we go down this rabbit hole yet, but it seems like something that we can figure out and repurpose, which would be really, really cool. So serialize argument. Yeah. I'm trying to remember what you you know, what you do to define your own active record. What is it? Store accessor? Yeah, coder is the option, I believe. Coder. Set custom coder to encode, decode your serialized attributes to from different formats. JSON, YAML, Marshall, supported out of the box. Generally can be any wrapper that provides load and dump. Okie dokie. So as long as we wrote some sort of class that has the load and dump class methods, we could probably build our own that would use the same interface. That would be awesome. Alright, make that a to-do. That would solve some of the frustrations for me, which would be great. Okay, so if we inherit from active model and active model attributes, we could even add, or include those modules at least, active model validations. That gives us the ability to add validations too, which is kind of sweet. Then I guess we simply say on deliver. Do we, I guess we want to maybe raise an exception here if it's not valid. So maybe we'll do the validate bang. Returns true if no errors are found, raises validation error otherwise. That's probably what we want, I would assume. Because then we can have like on deliver if valid bang validate. So there's no valid bang. So maybe we just, oh, that's probably, that's fine. We don't need a conditional here by doing validate because we're going to throw an exception which is going to stop processing it of this method anyways. So that's fine. Okay. We don't really care about the return value in this situation. So if we want to write a test for that, we can say validates attributes for params. Shoot. We may need to rewrite the value or the name of our, so we're calling them params right now. This is going to look for stuff called attributes. So we may need to change that around. Or let's see. Model. Can you see I'm working on a house? I've got my inspiration photos randomly here so I can get ideas and note them down. Okay. Yeah. So this is going to call or store them as attributes. That's funny that those docs look wrong. Initialize the new model with given params, but it's called attributes. Probably a simple little docs fix if you wanted to contribute that. So that might require us to go into base and change name of params to attributes. Or we can alias params to attributes. Will probably work too. Might have to be a class method. So class self And we could stick these in there too. I don't think we need indifferent access anymore. I was experimenting with that, so it's kind of a leftover thing that I added for that. With is basically a way of just calling new and assigning some params. We don't really need that with, or we did. I was trying to replicate the action mailer functionality of the method names, like this with, so it could assign params, and you could use params for that. If we go down this route of using active model, then everything gets renamed to attributes. Fun. So that requires us to like rewrite a ton of stuff. Not really what I want to do, but validations are validations, and that's pretty important. Okay, so at least with active model, then you're going to have your attributes. That's probably a required thing there. We don't really need this with method as much on the instance itself, because really you should be calling that on the class. So let's leave that alone. Let's look for the word params now. Just slowly start converting that around. Params, attributes. Hopefully that is gonna work. I don't think we have to worry about this being nil as much anymore, because it's going to be part of the initializer now. So some of those little hacky things that I did before should be fixed by making that adjustment. And then we can do like a notification down here, attribute example with a user ID, attribute user ID, attribute example, users one, deliver that to somebody, and this should be asserts, assert raises, a validation error. We'll see how many of these tests we broke, because we're probably broke a bunch. One of our tests is running slow. Well, more of those tests. Nope, that's Jumpstart Pro's tests. Broke a lot of tests there. Oh boy. Looks like all the... Yeah, here we go. Now we're getting undefined method attributes for noticed base. For class, where is this? Line 12. Maybe we can get rid of that. That was a little hacky, just to try and make converting the name easier. Using new would be fine. It doesn't really matter. I just wanted to kind of mimic the interface with the with method, with the with. But yeah, doesn't really make a big difference. Okie dokie. So I know that some of our notification types use the word params. Probably some of our tests too. So we should look for attributes. Or rename these to attributes. And go through these. Okay, dokie. because yeah, if we wanted to, for compatibility or something, we could have a params method here that just returns the attributes. I really wish there was a way to name it something else. This will be okay. Okay, so attributes. Attributes. Params attributes. Attributes. And Vonage. Params. Attributes. Oops. Attributes and attributes. Alright, cross your fingers, maybe this will work. No! 4 assertions, 10 errors. Params. Comment notification. Oh, okay. So our example notification in the dummy app notifications folder still references params. Attributes. That's a database column, so maybe I'll leave that for now. Oh, that test that I renamed from params to attributes is probably gonna blow up too because of that. Okay. There's one of these where we look at the last one, and that's params foo. Yep, same issue so far. Wrong number of arguments given 4, expected 1. Oh yeah, okay. In run delivery, yeah, probably because we're what line? 81. Perform now. Expected 0 and 1. Perform now. It should call the perform method. It went into active job and then active model initialize. I wonder if that's going to be part of the issue, is if we're inheriting from active job the arguments for active job. Its initializer is different than the active model initializer, and we're mixing the two. That's probably a big no-no. Yeah, this may not be the simplest thing. So the thing I did last night was try and refactor this so that rather than inheriting from active job here, we went into the delivery methods and inherit there. It didn't give me any benefits last night when I was working on it for the most part, but the important thing was, like, when we're doing the deliveries, we we don't have to reinstantiate this class the same way. I think that was quite a bit better. So we're doing something like this where let's keep this, I think. And rather than no. Pulled this out. Dropped it in here. And then for the regular deliver, we want to take the, not this class, but we want the class from the lookup. So the delivery method. So we're doing this. So Something like that, I believe. So this got rid of a lot of the complexity on one piece. Introduced a little bit on these two methods, but I think we could mostly drop like all this stuff, which is where it got a little bit tricky, because we were like reinstantiating this class in order to run just the active job stuff. But now we're making some real heavy changes to the internals of all this. So things are way different this way. Okay, so unknown attribute foo for comment notification. That is going to be a thing that will now require us to define those attributes, though. We can't have them as freeform anymore. We have to implement things like foo into each of our classes, which is fine, probably. I think I prefer it because it makes your notifications very consistent. You can't screw them up. That is real important. So that's probably the way to do it. We're going to have to go through all of our test cases here, though, and make sure that if we're passing in, foo, we want to make sure that it supports it. So we are using foo on... Yeah, and I guess we don't even need... We may not need this extra class that I was spiking out there. See how we're at. 5 assertions, 1 failure, 9 errors. Okie dokie. Perform for comment notification. That comes from deliver later, line 65. We'll start cleaning or refactoring this up quite a bit because, yeah, this is certainly more messy as it currently stands than I would like it. So for this, we will call deliver, or how was it that I did that? Because one of the tricks with this delivery method thing is that I believe if we go through or we're calling, yeah, so we want deliver on the recipient. New dot deliver. Want to pass in the recipient, notification, and the options. So method, options, and then we want to deliver. I'm going to do that here as well. Okay, options for line 49. Method, dig, options, class. Not my favorite. We'll refactor that once we get this working. Fingers crossed we'll be getting closer here. 83. Deliver later. Options. Okay, well, let's go back and move this back. We will take and set options. Options equals method options. First line here. of that loop. "12 assertions, 1 failure, 4 errors." We're making progress. Hopefully, we'll be in business soon. So undefined method, deliver later. Yes, makes sense. Deliver later. That should be perform later. So we're trying to use the active job method names there. So hopefully we'll get us back in business. So perform later. Did you mean perform? Parent class. Not implemented, error, writes to database. Deliver. $87. Perform later. And alright, so let's take a look at just this test line. 27. So we're looking at the action cable delivery method called deliver later, line 87. We change that to perform later. Undefined method perform later for action cable. But if we're inheriting from, we should be inheriting from application job as our parent class. Base class inherits from that. We're inheriting from base there. So we should have a perform later method. What are we missing? Maybe that is the case. So by making these, we want to call the deliver method that each one of those should inherit from. Perform later. Okay, let's try debugging with bybug. So our class, ancestors, application job, active job base. So we've got those. Methods. Let's get rid of the object methods. It has perform later. Oh, actually, what am I doing? Perform later. Duh. Perform now. This is really our perform method. We call deliver. Hey, we're closer now. Okie dokie. So notifications. For nil class. Interesting. So our recipient is not being passed in, I guess. Line test 27. Okay, so deliver later. Take the class, pass in the recipient. Let's double check our things here. Recipient, notification, options, call deliver, which would then call deliver here. Ask for the recipient. Notifications.create. Okay, so let's debug in here. The recipient, it's a user. So if we have class.new, oh, there we go. Yeah, same thing. Forgot to update those. That should be perform now. And perform later on the bottom one. And this one we want to always perform immediately. One error. Yes. Comment notification. That was where passing in. I think that's where I got lost last night because Rails 6.1 can pass in the class or a class name as an argument, but this could not. Yeah, so this is going to be a lot trickier of a change to do that than I thought as well. So I don't know. We can maybe hold off on these attributes. We could obviously build our own and just validate that that works. I believe if we were to go and do that with active model, it wouldn't be, or like a clone of active model kind of thing, it wouldn't be too bad. But then we could stick with our params names and validate those as well. So if we added our own accessor type of thing, that could work pretty well. Let's go take a look at the GitHub code for this and see what we're at. So attribute assignment is probably the main file that we need to look at here because it's going to do the attribute assignment. Surprise, surprise. Yeah, assign attributes. Okay, attribute. From database, interesting. From user, wonder what that does. So this is each of the attributes themselves. Attribute methods. This must be the metaprogramming stuff for the attributes. Names themselves. Yeah, looks like it. Here's where they define the attributes. Okay. So you have the list of attribute types. So hash, and then type default value is the default value of each. And so they merge in the name and the type. It's pretty cool. That's really it. So maybe we do that instead. We could undo all the param stuff and we could just build our own validate method. It seems like it would be a lot easier. We'll probably have a lot of stuff to undo in our diff though. Okie dokie. So maybe let's do git add -p. I made a couple typo fixes in the README. A couple things in README. And then, okay, we made a lot of changes in this file. So lib noticed delivery methods. We can go through probably all of these and reset them, I think. Because they're mostly just renaming attributes to param, or params to attributes. Changed our delivery method stuff a little bit. Lib noticed delivery methods. And we can probably go back into base and roll back all these things. Just kind of look at what we've done. Because really we just want to get back to where we had our validate that we added. Because this could be as simple as saying, let's do class self, move these in to that. I don't think we were using that at all, the width on the instance, because you can change the params there. So let's get rid of self on these. We can add a class param names or something. We'll do a push of the name just like we do with our deliver by. Then we can validate each of those that they exist. So that'd be super easy. We can make def validate. We'll go through self.class.param names. Each do name, param name. And we'll check for blank, maybe? Or just check if they're nil. Nil's probably a better check, because if they are an empty string or something, we don't want that to be necessarily blank. So if param name is nil, raise validation error. Yeah, see if something like that works. So we can go to our comment notification. We want to have param foo. Params our noticed test file. Do we have attributes there? Yeah, okay. This is fine. And let's see what our test suite looks like now, because we've made a heck of a lot of changes and it's a little confusing to see where we've been. Okay, so undefined method with, for example, square brackets for nil class and validate nil. Okay, so let's go to our notice base. We'll just comment out this for now. Because our params are sometimes empty in our tests. So we have comment notification with that we call. Should be a class method called with. Oh yeah, because we're we'll put that back. I removed it, but we may want to get rid of that in the future. Let's just get our test back in order and get us back to where we need to be. So base is fine, but we need to also go back up, make sure that this inherits from that. We don't want to inherit from or include any of the active models stuff. And we have one reference of attribute now in the attribute example class in our test. So we're back to where we were. Great. There's quite a tangent there, as you can tell, but stuff happens sometimes. Param singular. Noticed validation error. Okay, great. Let's go into validations and take a look and see. Where is this validation error defined? Okie dokie. So they pass in the model into that, which is kind of neat. But that's something they do specifically for that because they're trying to add the errors to the object as well. We don't really need that. We want a noticed class here. And it doesn't need to do anything. It just needs to exist. So we can raise it. Did you mean noticed validation error? Yes, we did, in fact. Was expected, but nothing was raised. That is fine. Okie dokie. We're making progress here. So one of the things that we've got with this is that okay, if we get rid of, so I just didn't want to override, or let's see, why was I doing this? Didn't want to override the initializer or something for active job. So the initialize method, we can have accept params. I think that should be fine, and we can get rid of at params equals params new, because active job initialize, I don't think it does it do anything. Takes arguments and assigns them to arguments. That was, I believe, the reason why I had the with method there. Yeah. So let's put that back because we don't want to screw up those arguments. And this is another thing that like need more refactoring because I added active job as the base class. That has its own arguments as the initializer thing. When we pass in those things into there, it doesn't work quite the way I want it. That's where the job ID gets assigned, queue name and stuff. This is close to where I want the notice library to be, but it's not quite right. So things have evolved as I've been writing it, as you can tell. Okay. Now, because of this, we sometimes have a situation where params is nil because we don't have a default value for it. So we can write super or empty hash there. That should clean up these situations that I was dealing with before and this is because of the initialized stuff that we can't override as cleanly as I would like the active job arguments. So really, I want to go back through and another time go back through all that of refactoring the delivery methods to being jobs instead of what I've got. This has turned out to be a little bit wonky, working my way around I'm tiptoeing around active job this way, and I don't want to do that. Okay. So that should maybe get us to where our validations will work. No superclass method name params, that's fine. We want @params here because we have an adder accessor. Okay, foo is missing. Good. Foo is missing, foo is missing, foo is missing, and foo is missing. So notice test. What one? 69? Yeah. Okay. Notice, wait a minute. So validate. We want each one of these notifications to have their own separate params. So the class attribute is important there for that reason. I believe we're going to need to do param names here so you can inherit those values correctly between them. It may not, I don't think it's going to fix this issue, but it's related to that. So line 61 in our test. We were creating a comment notification, and that one has foo is required there, param foo. And that means we need to say with foo is bar. Two errors down. Line 55. Yep, there we go. With foo is bar. So basically any of these comment notifications that I've added that required param there, we're going to throw that exception. I can go here and remove that. Probably fix it too. It's not really needed in that example comment. Just need the one example that says user ID is required there. And there we go. Cool. So yeah, this library is little bit tricky because if we want to send these through active job, that adds some complexity. I think the way that active delivery works with active job is probably quite a bit better than this currently. And honestly, like we could probably replace the backend with active delivery on here and build our own like layers on top of it. So they call them lines, and I just don't like the terminology on it. So maybe it needs to get I don't know, we could fork it, and more or less we're going to end up with the same kind of code base we have here. I'm more interested in building the actual delivery methods and the options that you can define for these to fork them and expand it and all that. So yeah, I think I'm going to leave this for here. We made a little bit of progress, refreshed my brain on all these like nuances to setting this up. There's some complexity with that serializer stuff, being able to send over things that can be serialized for active job. That's the only real thing that seems to be the major blocker for me right now. So that is it for this screencast live stream. Probably post this on GoRails 2 in case anybody's interested. It's a little bit different than what I normally do, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. And, hit the subscribe button if you want to see more of these, or hit like if you enjoyed this video. I want to do more of these, and, hopefully I'll see you guys around in the next one. Later. See ya.